Can we welcome her with a loud salawat?
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإذ نجيناكم من آل فرعون يسومونكم سوء العذاب يذبحون أبناءكم ويستحيون نساءكم وفي ذلكم بلاء من ربكم عظيم وإذ فرقنا بكم البحر فأنجيناكم وأغرقنا آل فرعون وأنتم تنظرون وإذ واعدنا موسى 40 ليلة ثم اتخذتم العجل من بعده وأنتم ظالمون ثم عفونا عنكم من بعد ذلك لعلكم تشكرون وإذ آتينا موسى الكتاب والفرقان لعلكم تهتدون وإذ قال موسى لقومه يا قوم إنكم ظلمتم أنفسكم باتخاذكم العجل فتوبوا إلى بارئكم فاقتلوا أنفسكم ذلكم خير لكم عند بارئكم فتاب عليكم إنه هو التواب الرحيم وإذ قلتم يا موسى لن نؤمن لك حتى نرى الله جهرة فأخذتكم الصاعقة وأنتم تنظرون ثم بعثناكم من بعد موتكم لعلكم تشكرون وظللنا عليكم الغمام وأنزلنا عليكم المن والسلوى كلوا من طيبات ما رزقناكم وما ظلمونا ولكن كانوا أنفسهم يظلمون صدق الله العلي العظيم.
Thank you very much. Today we're very fortunate to be joined by Faduma Hassan, who is a Labour councillor in the London Borough of Brent. Can we welcome her with a loud salawat?
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. And thank you so much for inviting me today. Thank you to my dad for inviting me, although I know he is decided to be on holiday the day I come. And thank you, Mariam, for that introduction. My name is Faduma, and I've been asked today to talk about my experiences working in politics for the last 7 years, and having worked for the Labour Party in that time, for both the current leader and the former leader of the Labour Party. So hopefully going to share a bit of my experiences and journey in that. But please, I don't want to speak for too long. What I'm hoping for, inshallah, is that we'll have an open discussion and Q&A. But just to say, I'm not here as a Labour representative, so don't, hold me for your big collections or anything like that. I'm not here for any of those kind of things. I'm here very much on a personal capacity. So inshallah, we can learn from each other and have that conversation, have that open dialogue. So I thought if it's okay, I'll start with sort of my background and sort of my journey into, I guess, the UK and into politics more widely. So in terms of my background, as you can probably tell from my face, I'm Somali, and I moved to the UK as a refugee at the age of 11, moved to Wembley, as many Somalis in the UK do, and where, we, didn't speak a word of English and had to very much be thrown, starting in year 5, and very much had to be thrown in the deep end and pick up the language and skills and so on, and very much quickly became a translator for the rest of the family and the rest of the street and so on. So that's sort of, I think, from a very young age, being resilient and active and engaged with what's going on around you has been very much something that I had to be, even if I didn't necessarily want to be. And then sort of in the older ages, from by the times I was in my teens, I was very much involved in like school campaigns and so on. So one of the first campaigns I ran when I was in, I think, year 8 was I really didn't like the school canteen food and the prices were going up. So I did this whole big petition and campaign around that and got all the sixth formers and so on to print me things in this, you know, they had a fancy building and printers there. So I got them to print the petitions out for me and, you know, made this whole campaign. And I think that was like the first taste of campaigning that I had that was really exciting and got me going. And from that age, I think I kind of had this name for myself that I was like the justice warrior in the school and in my family and so on. So that's sort of a little bit of taster of sort of me. And then more professionally, a few aunties and uncles have asked me what I studied, and I actually did not study politics. I studied philosophy and religion at Salaat, and I didn't plan to go to politics at all. I just thought that was just a hobby, an activist thing that I did on the side. You know, if I was upset about my local library closures, which happened when I was around 16, I ran a campaign with others on that and so on. So it wasn't a career that I went into really. Actually, I became a teacher, and I was a secondary school teacher for many years. And I would say working in politics was sort of an accident. Because what happened was that Jeremy Corbyn ran for Labour leadership, and Jeremy was always somebody that he always supported in all the little campaigns. It didn't really matter how small it was or how big it was. He would come in his little bike and, you know, there'll be like 10 people in a room and he'll be the 11th. And that's sort of how I always saw him. And when he was running for Labour leader, I kind of thought it was a joke, really, because I didn't think... I thought, let's give it a go. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, you know, I went on it with a serious kind of face. But really, ultimately, I thought, let's widen the debate. Let's sort of engage people, because 2015 and after the result where Ed Miliband lost was quite a depressing time. And it felt like, you know, we just had a coalition government. Can we really do another Conservative government? And how long would that go for? So really, I saw Jeremy as a catalyst or as a sort of a marker for trying to open a conversation that I felt wasn't happening in the country, particularly around austerity, and how we would want an economic policy to kind of, the economy of this country to be ran. And I thought he would be the face of that. Little did I know that he would sort of change the next few years of my life, because I ended up volunteering in that campaign and then later getting a job in that campaign. And as they say, the rest is history, really, in terms of my political kind of career. So yeah, I worked for Jeremy in his campaign. And after that, an organisation was started called Momentum. And Momentum was... During Jeremy's campaign, a lot of people who were never involved in politics before ended up joining. So for the first time, especially lots of younger people, lots of like working class people, lots of really diverse groups of people joined his campaign. And as a result of that kind of enthusiasm, we wanted to start an organisation called Momentum to kind of carry that conversation. And I worked on that, the start of that, and worked for Momentum for a few years afterwards, moving to Jeremy's office in Parliament. So I, as sort of it said on the title, I became now one of the very few people that have worked for both Jeremy Corbyn and Keir Starmer. And hopefully in the Q&A, maybe we can pick that up in terms of perhaps any questions that you may have. I'll leave it to you. So, sorry, I know I'm jumping, but just to give you that overview. So, yeah, so worked for Jeremy for a few years. In terms of my actual role, I worked in the political team. And within that, my job title is political advisor. And within that, it's, you know, political advisor is sort of like a generic term, really. But my particular role is around equalities and stakeholder engagement. So I work across teams between policy team and the comms team, and also the external relations. So making sure that our policies are other organisations that, you know, if it's an equality role, like women groups are feeding into that policy role and it makes sense to them, etc. So it's sort of a fingers in many pies type of role that I've done for the last few years. And this is where people like Miqdad, for example, through his MCB role, that's how we work together, and so on, just to give you a flavour of the kind of groups and organisation I work with. But it has really varied from international kind of, you know, when the Brexit, you know, negotiations were still happening, I have accompanied Jeremy to, you know, to going to Belgium and, you know, being part of that team that would go there, not necessarily leading in any way any of the negotiations before anyone says anything to me, but just sort of being at those high level kind of organisations. And then, of course, as we all know, 2019 happened where the Labour Party lost quite significantly, and Keir Starmer became leader of the Labour Party. And again, when that happens, the majority of people that work for the Labour Party are on political contracts. So in essence, that means you lose your job the moment whoever the leader is out of that job. And that included myself. So I was out of a job, I had to apply for another job, which I got, which is quite unusual because currently I'm one of 3 people that have worked for both Jeremy Corbyn and Keir Starmer. It is very normal for the new leader to completely start afresh with the people that obviously they support and follow them. So that's sort of my work and career kind of overview, I guess. And then some of the things that people have said to me is around explaining what it actually is like as a Muslim. And as a Black Muslim, as a woman, what it's actually like working in politics. And without, you know, trying to be politically correct, the best thing I can say is it's difficult, especially if you're not, I think it's difficult for anyone if you're not, like, you know, a white man called James in a blue suit. Like, if you differ from that, then I think it would be really difficult kind of place to be. And for lots of different reasons, you know, it can be because of your class. Like, you know, if you didn't go to, I think a lot of you will know that in politics especially, it's very classist in many ways, where everyone knows each other and everyone has gone to the same universities and the same schools and so on. So I think that element can be really, really difficult. Being a woman, of course, again, those, you know, that misogyny and sexism doesn't go away from those kind of places. If anything, I think in different ways, it's on a hyper kind of level. And then the racism and Islamophobia, I think we've seen in recent years, across parties, but particularly we've seen within the Conservative Party how Islamophobia and racism is kind of just wiped, and no one really wants to discuss it as a serious matter to kind of tackle. So again, you can imagine somebody who is ticks all those boxes for some reason, what the kind of barriers would be for that. But alhamdulillah, I think even with all of those, some of those barriers, I think being in the heart of politics has a lot of advantages and a lot of positives. Like, alhamdulillah, I felt that being in those spaces has been really important for me, and for people like us to be in those spaces, because if we're not, those decisions are, in the simplest term, those decisions are being made. It is going to tick on and go on, whether you're in the room or not. But if you are in the room, there is a level of influence that you can have. So that's sort of in the simplest term kind of that overview that I hope I have given. And I really wanted, I said to Miqdad, and I hope it's okay with everyone, I really wanted to just spend this evening, if we can, just doing a Q&A. And like I said, I'm not a Labour Party official here. So, but I hope I can share my experiences and thoughts via an open discussion, if that's okay with everyone. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Faduma. So as she said, we've got plenty of time for Q&A. So if you have a question, just put your hand up, and inshallah we'll get a mic to you on either side.
Assalamu alaikum, Faduma. So recently we've seen that the Conservative Party has had lots of, BAME candidates for leadership. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of us have been surprised by the fact that it was the Tories who had that as opposed to Labour. Why do you think that was?
Do you want me to do it one at a time? Okay, cool. I mean, I think, we will have, the first black or brown Prime Minister is going to be from the Conservative Party. I think that we can say that. I think it'll probably be very soon. And I think a lot of it is actually a very conscious thing that the Conservative have done, which they've done so much better than the Labour Party, which is talent spot and target people directly, go to the best, whatever places that you want to go to, and encourage people directly to become MPs. Unlike the Labour Party, unlike the Conservative, does have a lot of rules and a lot of internal kind of systems that means that actually it is quite difficult for somebody to become a member of parliament or to become the candidate. We have a lot of rules, we have a lot of barriers as well that you can say. I think the Labour Party in many ways, when it comes to these issues, actually is quite old-fashioned. And the reason I say that is when you look at the black and brown Conservative MPs, they represent areas that could be very, very white, like they can be 100% white. Whereas when you look at the black and brown Labour MPs, the majority of them, if not all of them, represent very high black and brown areas. And I think we have this thing where we think, some Labour people think, in a very traditional way, that actually the in some ways is a disrespect to the constituents, right? Because they think actually they won't vote for a black or brown face, right? We have to put somebody that is like them. And we have also I think many Labour people have this view of a working class person has to be a white working class person. They don't see black and brown people as working class people when they talk about like a trade union person, for example, etc. So I think it's an old baggage, and I think actually when it comes to these issues, the Labour Party is really, really behind, and I think it will continue to be behind unless something drastic happens. Like for example, the way that the Labour Party now is 50-50 in terms of gender balance. And the only way that happened was not because they're like, forward and all about equality, but because they put through rules that meant that X number of constituencies had to pick a woman for their candidate. And that's how they got to 50-50. So I think until they do something similar with black and brown candidates or change their rules around selections, I don't think it would happen anytime soon. Yeah. That's kind of depressing. Sorry.
Any other questions?
There's a one behind you.
How are the Labour Party taking it now that Liz Truss has left? Are they rejoicing, partying?
I wouldn't say. I think it's kind of a very strange situation we're in, right? Where we're about to have the third Prime Minister or the return of one, depending on who you believe. So I think it's a very strange time, but the idea that we're not going to have a general election, but we're going to continue as if like we're living in a very normal time is a very, very strange thing. I don't really know what to say about that. But
is Labour making they've got a good chance to come in next time, right? So are they doing a lot of preparation, a lot of work? Are they getting a lot of good advisors, to set up businesses? Because this is a golden opportunity now.
Absolutely. I think Labour is in a good place. I mean, if you believe the polls, which I'm always like a bit iffy about, like Labour is, I think they're like 35, 40 points ahead, which is unheard of. So I think they're in a really, really good place. It's just a matter of, I think, calling a general election. And yeah, I think they're ready to govern if they get that opportunity.
They've got good advisors, because in the past, right, they've never had good advisors, and that's what the downfall was. See, now, within the next year or 2 years, they have to brush up and really need some advisor like Rishi Sunak to tell them what to do.
I don't know if Rishi would want to work for the party. I think he wants to be Prime Minister. But, I guess it depends on what your definition of good advisors are. But I think there are good people that work for the Labour Party, and they're very much focused on trying to win a general election.
But they're not very good with business. People want to set up business, and they need some clever person like Sunak to say, look, this is how you do business. See, a lot of people want to be entrepreneurs. There are a lot of computer specialists now. you know, IT, which was not there 20 years ago. Now there's so many who want to work from their garages and all that. So the Labour has to provide these opportunities for the next 10 years. That's what I think, anyway.
Sounds good to me.
Assalamu alaikum, Ms. Hassan. Thank you for coming on a Friday evening, especially after a very busy week.
My pleasure.
I have a comment and a question. The comment is, as an ex-resident of Wembley myself, you don't have to say whether I'm correct or not, because you mentioned about the sixth form and the kind of era that you're from. I guess you're from either Wembley High Technical College or Preston Manor. You don't have to answer that. The other
I went to a much worse school.
Okay. Alperton, maybe.
John Kelly.
Okay.
Further down.
Okay. And the other thing is, that's in Neasden, so... Okay.
My primary was here.
Okay.
We're getting a real history today.
There was another comment, but I'll leave that. The question is, with your role, is it more an advisory role, or would you say it's more of an administrative role where you're also getting access to a lot of info that other people wouldn't have, and maybe opens a lot of doors for you for the future? Or is it a bit of both?
Definitely a bit of both. I think every role has an administrative side to it. But yeah, my primary role is advising the leader of the Labour Party on equality matters and doing his outside external stakeholder engagement work on those equality matters. So yeah.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Faduma. You think Labour made the wrong call on Brexit?
I think they made the wrong call in terms of getting to the position that they did and how late that they got to the position that they did, and pretending for a long time that they had a position when actually they were trying to fudge a position. And I think by the time in 2019 that they said what their real position was, it was actually really, really too late, and no one really cared to hear it by that point. So it's kind of a difficult one. Like if you mean like should they've done Remain, I think that one is a difficult one because I voted Remain, so it's a hard one. But I think there was a level within the wider Brexit conversation where actually when we were talking about people that were going to vote leave, we were talking about it in a way that was belittling and actually saying that you're racist or you're dumb or you're this or you're that, when actually people had a wide range of reasons why they wanted to vote leave. And I don't think Labour and others really acknowledged that nuance and that complexity within that. And actually allowed people like Boris Johnson to take lead and to be able to say 300 million, whatever was on his bus. Yeah, I hope that answers it in a way.
Why I'm asking is to say that now it will be difficult for Labour to row back even a little bit on the Brexit parameters. And without that, the relations with Europe will not be stable, especially in terms of probably free movement of goods, not people. People is a much more sensitive thing, as you know. But free movement of goods may. But then Labour will find it very, very difficult to get there. And this is my worry, that this will poison their government if they make one.
No, I mean, I think that is a legitimate concern to have. But I think the freedom of goods is within the rest of Europe's interests as well, and the rest of the world's interest to have that. So I don't, where else it'll be, obviously for businesses that you mentioned earlier, etc., it'll be more expensive and perhaps longer, etc. It is still within everyone's interest to be able to have movement, right? So, I don't know. Brexit is not my specialty at all, but it's, yeah, and I think now in terms, there is no rolling back on things. I think we're in the stage of trying to make the best of it and try and make the government should try and make new trade deals and so on and open up the world. So how much they're doing that, I don't know, because Liz Truss was offending our nearest neighbour within days of being Prime Minister. So we will see. We will see how they get on.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for sharing your experience so far. I have a personal question for you, I guess. So you stumbled into politics, it sounds like, as many of us do with our careers. Where do you see yourself going? Do you see yourself standing as an MP one day, Prime Minister? What's on the cards for you, I guess, now?
So one thing I actually did forget, which you did say in the introduction, was I was a councillor in Brent for a number of years. And actually, in the last local elections, I didn't re-stand. So I have done a bit of local government for a term. In terms of standing, I don't have political ambitions to stand. But it's one of those things like, but at the same time, if something happened and it was the right thing, never say never. But I think I do think that I've come across many people that their entire goal and ambitions in life is to become an MP. And I think there's a bit of it that makes me really hesitant with that kind of person, because sometimes you wonder if it's for the right reasons and whether it's actually for the betterment of your community and, you're doing it for the right reasons. I don't think politics, becoming an MP is just another sort of tick box in your career or CV. I think if done right, it's very much a serving role, and you have a lot of responsibilities. And as Muslims, that is a huge thing that you'll be asked about as well. My sheikh always says, particularly when I was a councillor, he always said to me, if somebody's going hungry in your constituency, that's something that you're going to be questioned about. So I always think that, taking these positions of leadership willy-nilly is not really a thing that should be done. But at the same time, I don't have anything against people have ambition, just to be right, just to make it clear. But I think there needs to be that balance. And inshallah, I hope I'm somewhere in there.
Can I ask a follow-up question? So you were interested in campaigning and, I see it as projecting your voice. And I've been a similar person growing up. And that makes me very interested in politics because I understand the power of politics. But a lot of people don't, and they don't engage in politics. And I'd say until the cost of living crisis, people were quite apathetic to who was in charge and what they were doing. Do you think there's something we can do to change that? Or, have you influenced your peers to be more interested? What can we do really to change that and get people to vote as a basic step?
I think that's a really amazing question, and it's something that I definitely don't have the answers for. But I think, there's a thing about politics where it has just become about these, you look at PMQs, if you ever watch Prime Minister's questions, and they're all just shouting at each other, and you don't really know what's going on. And for a lot of people, that's politics. And actually, that is as far removed from politics, really, as you can get, because really politics is our everyday, from our bin collection to who's being fed. And I think if we can get that back and make it really basic, really localized, and just making people realize that actually the people power is far more powerful than, whatever your local council is doing, and if you are able to, group together, there's far more changes likely to happen. I think that so many people are disempowered and feel like they can't influence or change things. And I think if we're able to somehow try flip that script, I think that kind of could possibly change things. But it makes me sad because I think things like PMQs and the news and the way they present, oh, this just got leaked to me, and you'll see Beth Rigby and she'll be like, oh, my source has just said this. It feels like it's just like a gossip, and it is in many ways, it is just like their little playground is like a little machine where they all just chat to each other, and they're all friends, and they all secretly tell each other things. But really that's not politics. Like the politics is like, you know, why is the old lady gonna die in winter this year because she can't heat her home? Like that to me is politics, and I think that's where we need to change the heart of how things are done and how things are said, and hopefully that can empower people. But yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. So I just wanted to ask you about racism in the Labour Party. So we've just had the recent release of the Ford report. The Ford report mentioned that Islamophobia and racism against blacks were quite high in the party, and it hasn't really been dealt with. Then we've had the case with Aspana Begum just recently as well. So what do you think about racism in the Labour Party, and is it a big problem? Do you notice it regularly, and is anything being done about it?
I think, you know, the Labour Party is not, you know, the Labour Party says that it's a party of equality, you know, it's a party that has legislated many of the equality laws that we have and so on. But the Labour Party is not a vacuum in itself, like it is part of society, and obviously anything that happens in society, including racism, would be within the Labour Party. So I think it would be wrong of me to say that there isn't any racism, because there is, and I have faced racism within the Labour Party from, like, you know, my local CLP, my local constituency Labour Party and so on. It's there, and whether it's being dealt with, I think, you know, we've seen a response to the Ford report where Keir Starmer and David Evans, who's the what's his job? The General Secretary of the Labour Party, apologising for the culture and saying that they're going to make those changes. So I think it's certainly not something that people are pretending it isn't there. But whether it happens, the changes happens. And I think a lot of the changes is about culture and actually changing the way people interact in their local parties and so on. So I don't know how much I answered your question, but it's an ongoing project, I would say.
So Keir Starmer's response to the Ford report was this was something under Corbyn, so I don't care about it, right? Essentially. So yeah, he said he'll implement the whatever was recommended, but actually dealing with Islamophobia and black racism, he more or less denied that that was a problem under his party anymore. So following on from that, how would you compare racism in Corbyn's government to Keir Starmer's government?
Well, firstly, I think, I mean, I'm not here to be his Keir's spokesperson. I do think Keir has responded and said that, and not putting blame on Corbyn, and said that actually this is a party matter. This is a culture of the party that needs to change in terms of some of the things that have been shown in that leaked report and within the Ford report as well. So I don't think he's completely dismissing it. I don't know if I can compare racisms, to be honest, between Jeremy's time and Keir's time, because I think that would be unfair. Like it's I think there are some, like, a lot of people feel that there's a hierarchy of racism, and that there's a difference of the way in which, like, racisms have been responded to. But I think from my end, I really wouldn't want to be drawn into, like, what's worse or what has been dealt with and what hasn't been, because I think racism is racism and should be dealt with in the strongest terms.
Okay, you said that you worked for both Jeremy Corbyn and Keir Starmer. How different was it?
I think that how different is it?
Well, I mean, so, you know, working with two different people, obviously it'll be different anyway. But okay, so let's start from the beginning. How was Jeremy Corbyn treated by the Labour Party itself compared to Keir Starmer being treated by Labour Party?
Of course, like, you know, in terms of the actual party machinery, the party machinery didn't want Jeremy to win. So, of course, that hostility and that pushback was very evident, including, like, for myself, when I first started working at the Labour Party. It wasn't a pleasant place to work, to say the least. And obviously, having worked there when Keir started as leader, you can see that difference. I think that difference in terms of the warmth in which Keir was received is very that's probably the most significant thing that I can point to. And then in terms of like the difference, I guess, of working between the two, I mean, they're two different human beings. So in terms of the way they behave and work on things are very different. Their interest and knowledge of things is very different. And yeah, very different types of leaderships, I would say.
So could you give examples of how different, I mean, so you talk about maybe knowledge of obviously, Corbyn has been around for a long time, so he understands things far different to what Keir does, right?
I would say Jeremy is somebody with a vast knowledge of the world and a vast... I don't think there's a country or a group of people... It can be the tiniest little island and he'll know people from it and he would have done a campaign on that. And it can be like the tiniest island that something has been done wrong there and he'll been involved somehow. So I think that's like the amazing, like, you know, that's sort of, you can't really fake that or create that with another person. And Keir has very different strengths. Like he obviously was a lawyer, so very much on the detail. There's no briefing that you would write for him that you will not get a comment back and you will not get, like, you know, engagement with, which is, you know, it's good to know that your briefings are being well read and you get feedback. So it's very different type of personalities and skill sets, I would say.
So do you think that if the party machinery backed Jeremy Corbyn, he would have won elections much earlier?
If they backed him, would we win?
Yes. If the party machinery was working with him rather than against him, you would say the good chance he might have beaten Theresa May.
I mean, we were very close in 2017, so maybe, but it's kind of hard one to say in hindsight. But at the same time, it wasn't just the party machinery at the beginning, it was also the entire establishment, the entire media, the entire political establishment, and every organisation that you can think about. So it's kind of a difficult one to say if one bit was working when all the other bits weren't working. So probably not, really, but it's a hard one to answer in any real honesty.
So why was party machinery so much against him?
They just didn't, I mean, they didn't agree with his politics. They didn't agree with the direction in which he wanted to take the Labour Party, the changes that he wanted to make within the Labour Party, including, like, you know, it could be as little as changing the voting system within the party. So Jeremy wanted to be one member, one vote, so every single person who's a Labour member to be able to have a vote within any kind of elections and so on. So even a lot of it was actually internal matters that are much older than many people in the Labour Party. Like, they are very, very old political fights that sort of reared its ugly head again. So it's internal factional fighting is how I would answer it, of no real substance.
My question has been answered. Thank you very much for the for your comments and my question was about so Keir Starmer made like certain commitments when he became Labour leader to his membership, and he proceeded, like, he went on to abandon all of those commitments. And since he took over as leader of the Labour Party, we have seen him imposing candidates without kind of accountability, suspending like democratic processes in order to impose candidates on different groups of people. Is that a leader we can trust to run the country?
I think one thing to say is that there's never been a Labour leader that has not, in one way or the other, been accused of influencing or shaping selections. So people's disagreements with that is not going to be anything new. Like, it's always been there. In terms of the trust question, I think trust in politics more generally, it's probably at an all-time low from everything that I've read and seen. And it's a difficult one to answer because I think there's so much apathy and distrust of politicians and politics. and not to individualize it with him, but like generally speaking. So it's a difficult one, but I think it's on politicians and on the political system to try rebuild trust rather than on people. So watch this space. I don't know. And I don't know what needs to be done to rebuild trust, because it's not, in recent years, you see every politician make commitments and break them, or fudge them in one way or the other. So I don't know how we overcome that culture, because I think it is like a cultural thing. It's like a norm. No one even really blinks or thinks anything of it when they break their promises.
Do you mind if I ask another question? It's okay. Is anyone else? Yeah, so like we've had also issues with, as was mentioned, like the party machinery, unelected officials making, having undue influence upon the democratic kind of direction of the party, and many other such issues as well. What structural changes would you like to see in the Labour Party to make it a fairer space, and make it a space, as you mentioned, where the right people and the people who care about the community are chosen to represent that community?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the biggest problems with the Labour Party is factionalism, and that, I mean, being on the left of the party or the right of the party isn't necessarily a bad thing. Like, you know, being involved in actual factional things is how I learned lots of things and how to campaign and so on. So it's not necessarily a bad thing within itself, but the way in which it's used to beat other people and like badmouth other people or like try to make their lives difficult, I think that's really a disease. Like, I think factionalism has become a disease in the Labour Party, and if there can be anything to try address that in a real way, not again try address it, but actually that addressing is also factional. So it's how do you try to become factionalism is the key, I think, to actually also rebuilding trust within the Labour Party, because in recent years it feels like within the Labour Party everyone hates somebody else more than they actually, sometimes they hate Tories or they dislike Tories. So it's like, how do you just get, you know, you'll be in a room like this in a Labour Party meeting, but the seats between, you know, where people are sitting is because they hate the other person sitting on the other side because of factional reasons. So how do you overcome that in any real way where you can have a healthy factional thing, but not where it's so toxic? It's, I think, the real answer.
Oh, thanks. I'd like to know where the funding comes from the Labour Party. I know from the Tory parties, big businesses like Tesco's, Marks and Spencer give millions of money to the Tories, yeah? Labour has got insufficient funding, right? Who funds the Labour Party? Because money is very important, it's power. You know, and
Indeed.
in election times, you can win elections if you've poured enough money at the right time. And like you said, all the MPs need to be trained how to sit with each other. Even though they don't like each other, they have to be polite with each other. This is the British culture. You can't sit away if you're working with each other, you know. And I think that mannerisms and that, from after reading the papers, has to be taught. You know, you have to have a specialist come in and say that, look, you can't show this to the public eye. This is giving you bad publicity. Anyone reading the stupid papers like Mirror and all this Daily Mail is going to get influenced, you know, you're going to think they're rubbish, they're barking like dogs. Excuse my language, but that's what they think. So, you know, you have to... So where does the funding come from? Who funds the Labour Party? Is it, you know, is it the taxpayers' money? Who? And how much is given? Because every year I find less and less people are voting less.
Well, in terms of the Labour Party itself, the majority of the Labour Party's money comes from members and membership money. So anyone that is a Labour Party member pays however much, well, the minimum amount is like £5, I think, or just £4 something each month, but you can pay more or less. And so the vast majority of it is through membership money. And then the rest of it is donations, again, mostly from party members. And then I guess the third category really is funders, like big donors super rich people, big businesses, etc. But obviously, the money that the Labour Party gets is nowhere near how much the Tories get. I don't know the numbers. I'm not in that field to know those, but a lot of it actually would be publicly available. If you want to do some research, it'll be out there because all political parties have to share their accounts.
Thanks. I know a few people have like double questions. I'm just going to try and get those that haven't had a turn yet to ask first, if that's all right.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, in terms of the investigation process for when there's, accounts of bullying or harassment or things like that. I don't know if you have any experience with it, but how successful is that investigation process? Do you ever feel like it's thoroughly investigated? Because we know that the bullying and the Islamophobia and the racism is there, but when it's brought to light, say if it goes to, I don't know, Speaker of the House, or I don't know how the process works. Is it investigated? Does any light come to it? Do we have you have to get the two parties together, one has to apologise to another? What actually happens when this gets reported and investigated?
So the Labour Party has recently changed the way in which complaints are done. So prior, there's been a lot of, what was the right word? There's been a lot of conversation about complaints not being taken seriously, particularly around anti-Semitism, and people sending in complaints and it just sitting in an inbox and no one responding for many years or many months. And as part of the Equality and Human Rights Commission that looked into the Labour Party around anti-Semitism, the Labour Party had to do a whole new complaint system, an independent complaint system, which has an external element to it, because before it was all internal, facing in terms of who investigated and who did the outcomes, etc., was all within the Labour Party. So now they have some external people to try to make it more fair and more transparent and so on. So that process is a new process. We will see how it goes. There are the complaints section of the party have a huge backlog that they're going through. A vast majority of it is around anti-Semitism from the last few years, and around Islamophobia and so on. Again, it would be the same system that any complaint would go through. I think one of the things that the Labour Party really is trying to do and needs to do is building trust in that system, because a lot of people think actually is another factional thing, and they don't want to engage with it, but actually knowing that process exists, and the more people take it seriously and hold it accountable, I think the better it'll probably, inshallah, will be.
Thank you. Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Hi, thanks. About the printed media, I want to ask a question, or maybe two, about printed media. I don't know if you could comment, to what extent do you think the printed media reflects reality of what's going on, if you like, in Labour HQ? I mean, when you read the newspapers one morning, does it look like it's actually well aligned with what's going on, or everything you read sort of has massive inaccuracies? And the other part of the question is, did you sort of witness situations when the policy produced by Labour HQ was driven by what's in the media, if you like? Do leaders read the newspapers and say, in that case, let me, I just want to understand the relationship and the alignment between both.
It's a really good question. I've been in rooms, I'll be in a meeting, and I'll get text messages telling me what is happening right there in the room that I'm in, because somebody else in the room is live tweeting or messaging a journalist as I am in the meeting. So sometimes it is accurate word for word, and other times is, with little spices and a little mixture of things. So it really varies, I would say, but political journalists with their sources sometimes are very straight and very correct, and sometimes it's sort of through different people, so it has a lot of spices that didn't need to happen and lots of more excitement than the reality was. So yes and no, I would say. And then in terms of yes, like I would definitely say, yeah, sometimes what is happening and how people react to particular things are then suddenly they're like, oh yes, we need a policy on. I'll give you an example. So, you know, Marcus Rashford, mashallah, he did that amazing free school meals campaign. I don't think any political party would have engaged with free school meals as a important policy area to push if it wasn't for his campaign. And after his campaign, and the momentum that it gained and the positive response that the public gave it, suddenly every political party believed in free school meals and it was like their number one thing and everyone was talking about it. So it's very much can be influenced by whatever the thing of the day is.
Sorry, can I ask a question?
Of course.
So just two questions, actually. One is just, it'd be really great to hear more about your experience as a councillor and the kind of impact that you can have on the local community as a councillor, because I feel like more recently I've kind of seen the power that a councillor can have rather than just dealing with the bins. That I feel like is like the main kind of...
Bins are very important.
Yeah, of course. But it'd be really interesting to hear about what you can do as a councillor and the impact you can have. And number two, I think often, you know, like I've had quite a few conversations now with Muslims who have said that, you know, they're quite disheartened or apathetic to like politics now, you know, given what happened to Corbyn and the kind of Islamophobia that has been reported within the Labour Party. But I think often we forget that actually it's way worse in the Conservative Party. And so, you know, what do you think, do you think we should still vote Labour or do you think we shouldn't vote, number one? Because I've spoken to a lot of people who have recently said that they're not going to vote because they don't want to vote for either, and Labour kind of assume that Muslims are just always going to vote for them, and so actually they don't really have much of a say within the party because they're just a token, like they're going to get that vote, it's going to be safe. And then, like, what can we really do to kind of impact the Labour Party? Because obviously, you know, radical policies that Jeremy Corbyn supported were rejected, and I don't personally see a way of getting those radical policies back into the Labour manifesto without having another Jeremy Corbyn. But even that, like, I feel like that's not really going to happen in the near future. So what can we do as people who believed in those policies? You know, what can we do to make sure that they kind of, or we work towards getting those still through and not forgotten about, essentially?
Absolutely. Thank you for both of those questions. Firstly, in terms of being a councillor, I'd really encourage everyone in the community to firstly engage with their councillors. If you're not engaged with them, hold them to account if you're not already, and know them would be my number one. And if you are able and want to become a councillor, I think it's really important that everyone, it's really important that people in the community really do get involved with local government. I think actually so much of our day-to-day life is decided by councillors and is decided by our local council. But lots of people don't really engage with it unless it's about like their parking or like, you know, or the council tax rise or something like that. Like then people don't really engage. I think councillors do have a huge influence. They can do. And they have a huge budget actually. The council does, and the council leaders. So there's a huge, I think, levels of influence there on our day-to-day life. And actually there's also a huge level of flexibility to be able to do things and make a real change in the community from, you know, whether it's like, you know, opening youth centres or doing, you know, targeting a older people's program, etc. Like it can be really a wide range of things. So I do think like being a council and being involved in the council and what they're doing is really important. And on a personal level, like I'm more than happy to help anyone that is running for the council if they want me to read the application or do training session, etc. Because I've done those quite a lot in the past. And then in terms of like vote Labour and what next? I would say absolutely. I personally would encourage everyone to vote Labour. And I completely understand all the things that you've pointed out in terms of like believing in a more radical policy and manifesto and so on. But I just think at the moment, firstly, yes, I completely agree. And you know that my politics, I very much, I think, share similar politics to you. And see like how it can be really disheartening when you had so much high hopes through Jeremy and that manifesto. But I think where we are at in politics, we don't really have, and I don't want to say like, oh, we don't have an option. We always have an option. But I think really through Labour, we're able to make the changes that we really want to make. And we have seen that in the past, like anything, you know, from, you know, yeah, like there's so many different things that I think through Labour that has been able to achieve, and I'm hopeful still that is able to still achieve. So I'd say try to stay involved, and I don't believe staying involved in politics is only via the mechanism of a political party. If anything, I think it's far more important and far more radical to be involved in more grassroots organisations and in the local community. I think that's far more, that makes bigger changes than sometimes just being involved in your local Labour Party. Not that, you know, be involved in that too if you can, but yeah. So that's sort of where I'm at. Yeah, so vote Labour.
Maybe the last question. Yeah, thank you.
Sorry. Is it possible to be involved in politics, Labour or otherwise, when the norms of sort of the society's values and norms are so contradictory to a lot of Islamic beliefs?
If you work in politics, your Islamic beliefs will certainly be challenged in terms of morality and being honest and having values and morals. I think that politics can be a dishonest space, if nothing else. And I think it's really, if you are going to be involved in politics, I think it's really important to be close to your community and close to the mosque or your community centre, etc., and have people in your life. And have people in your life that remind you of Allah and remind you of why you do the work that you do, and remind you that you're not doing it for yourself just to get a fancy title and a fancy job and a fancy wage. I think it's actually more important than ever, because there's a lot of shaitans around to push you out of the reasons that you're doing it and to remember why you're doing it. So I hope that answers that.
Thank you so much. I think we might end there. Thank you so much for giving so much of your time, answering questions. And yeah, can we end with a loud salawat? Thank you.
Thank you.